Hello and welcome back to the Timeline Astrology Podcast with myself, Gary O'Toole, and my very special guest, Kishori. Today we're continuing our Maps of Consciousness series with Rahu and its placement in the sign Scorpio. So this is where we begin to unearth very many hidden things and many things we would probably prefer to remain hidden. And it's one of the more challenging placements as seen in Vedic astrology, but as always, Kishori gives us a different perspective, a much needed counterbalance to the predominant narrative. So without further ado, here's Kishori. So welcome back, Kishori. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you. It's a delight. It seems ages since we spoke, but we've been busy, haven't we?
Yes, you've been busy, especially with the book, the launch of the Song of Rahu. So
Yes.
Tell us all about that. How's it going?
Oh, well, it's been like round and round in circles, singing, going round and round and round and round the mountain. But then, story of our lives, isn't it? We come round and round and we think, oh, I've done all that. Oh, no, you haven't. But it all seems so familiar. So I'm in a period now of not thinking about it too much. Occasionally I'll ask Vanessa, that's my editor, of how it's the tweaking is going, and she says yes, and got to format this bit, and I kind of, as it's not really much to do with me exactly, except seeing it done nicely, I let it go. And then I had this swollen foot, which would make it more difficult to walk at the moment, but that's getting better. So that's been a part of my experience. People would say to me, aren't you satisfied or happy? And I go, well, it's not changed my fundamental state at all. I mean, it's done now, and it's with any, as all is coming to fruition, it should all be ready by the end of this month and done and dusted on to the next thing. The poetry of embodiment and the magic book and my memoir and all of those things. So next bits of writing are coming. And and some talks and some presentations and some webinars and the regularity I see is going to be there of once a month having this free Zoom for anybody that's really interested in it can apply to join that and come to that. So we have a few more questions and a bit more elaborations, and I'm going to be taking a question or let's say a difficult point for the mind. There isn't anything difficult, but like that sentence, and Rahu is a poisonous snake feeding at the breast of the mother. She nourishes and treasures him, her changeling child, the malformed, the experience of difference. And that kind of sticks in people's throats, some people anyway. I think, what? Why would the Divine Mother, or whatever you conceive to be the Shakti, the feminine embodiment, why would she nourish the shadow? There's always some deep, deep significance in these koans. So I love that. I love the things which are almost like, why on earth? Like when I was younger and I used to question, why would the one invest in duality in the first place? That was when I was much younger, attempting to get some clarity on it all. So it makes me laugh. It makes me really, really enjoy when you get to a bit that couldn't be, yet it is.
Well, now, I mean, once again, you preempted our discussion about Rahu and Scorpio, because indeed that would bring up that kind of question. And so, really, well, I'm going to put it to you now. Well, actually, can you answer that for us? Why would the mother, feed the snake?
Yeah. Why on earth would she nourish and treasure a poisonous snake in her bosom? Why? And it's that what I used to call the syrup on shit things of making it all nice and clean and tidy, but it's a maelstrom of chaos beneath the surface, for example. But the sophisticated way of living is that we are in agony because something is going on inside in the mind, and yet we present a sophisticated surface to the world, to the people we're speaking with, in order to be able to function. And it's no good lying on the floor kicking your heels like a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum because you've lost your keys, for example, or you've gone bankrupt. You know.
But it's interesting though how you would do that though with the people you're most intimate with. Like you're, for example, like you might lose your keys and have a temper tantrum on your own when you get home. Like you wouldn't do that in public. And that's very much about what Scorpio is all about, of course, because it's all that hidden stuff.
Yes, it is the hidden, and the hidden stuff is where the next thing comes from. You're not going to get change from putting another layer of wallpaper on top of what's already moldering and decaying. And what's very, very interesting, as I'll tell you, is when I was living in Spain, before this particular phase of my life started, I'd gone to Orchiva intending to buy a little house and settle there. And somehow or other, I'd been there the summer and I wanted to move into town because the taxis weren't available to get into town. And I needed to go to town at least 2 or 3 times a week. Anyway, so I moved into this, what I thought was a beautiful apartment, part of a house with a lovely access to a pool, and it looked wonderful. But we could feel there was something not quite right underneath. But looked at it and then think, okay, we'll go for it. And it was actually the first night I was there. I mean, I had loads of people. This is what is interesting there. Loads of people that I did not expect came to help me move in and organize, as if it was really a party. And we had a lovely time. But that night, as I lay in bed, I could feel there was something horrific inside the walls. So I pulled the bed away from the wall to start off with. And the next day, and it wasn't this. And what I discovered eventually, that there was black mold. Well, there was something in the walls creeping out at me. Mm-hmm. And I got very sick very shortly, and I had to move out quickly. And so it's the hidden, and you have to be really careful, and more careful as we learn to live paying attention to the unseen and what's going on apparently on the surface, and looking at what's going on underneath. I mean, that isn't the reason why she nourishes him. We'll find that out in a minute. But the underneath makes you realize there is so much more, and pay attention to what is emerging from within, from the unknown, from the no thing, from the secret, and looking at those underlying currents between the surface world and the deeper world of the I am, the heart, and noticing them. So we are being evolved to function with more of ourselves, not just a little bit extra intuition, but actually more available to the no thing, which is where newness and transformation and the real, true, unmanifest desires of the heart, that's where they come from. They're not going to come from the place you know. They've got to go from the place that the mind doesn't know. So it's what lies beneath, what lies in those hidden currents beneath, in the depth, beneath the surface of the water, so to speak. And that is what is of value. Not to just surrender to them, but to notice, and notice the distorting currents that we are here to transform, or to notice and make choices. So bit by bit over the years, what I have learned from all of this, that which interferes, is that it brings into consciousness what else is available from the more subtle feelings, not just eyesight and hearing and all of that, but the more subtle currents, the more subtle feelings, and to be aware of those. And not to say, well, you have to die and go into heaven or some other state, but you can do it now, because we are already full spectrum, potentially. We can download it all. And sometimes we notice when it interferes, but sometimes we have to really get hit on top of the head and have the rug pulled in order to wake up to the more subtle senses. And I mean, this is part of the pathway we're going on, with the value, the absolute importance of, say, a period like Scorpio, a frequency like the Scorpio energy, Scorpio state, to enable us to sink beneath and to notice that we have available to us at all times, as we sharpen our senses, our more subtle senses, to the whole full spectrum. And when things arise, which our ability to make conscious choices is activated, then we make those choices. Mostly mind doesn't believe it has the full power that we do have, the power of the absolute. We have all of that. We are source as well as the enjoyer of the fruit, with the grower and the creator of the fruit, and we can have it any which way we want, but not if we're not canny. This is the end times, when the requirement to be innocent as doves and as wise or cunning as serpents, and the quality of this sinuous, winding, not logical, not straight, not straightforward of the conscious mind, but to follow the winding path of that serpentine energy that goes round and round and round, sometimes around and around the mountain, and to be aware of it and to value it and value the slowness and the steadiness of the unraveling. It's inexorable. It has to happen. It will do, but it will come slowly. And the more we pay attention to those subtle intuitions and those subtle knowings and develop them in the silence and the inner inquiry, that is the way. It's ultimately the only way to live. I'm not advocating it like this is the spiritual path or this is no, but it's to be using all of you, all of your abilities and knowings, and let them evolve by noticing what's going on. This is going on. Is this what I would consciously choose? The integrated me, the full me? No. But we do find our way through everything, and we bring it back swiftly or slowly. We bring it back to the focus, the steadiness. So the Scorpionic and the Rahu energy, where that which cuts across, I'm meant to hear what you've got to say a bit about it as well. But it feels like some of the most intense times is what I feel. But it doesn't have to be. It can sharpen us to instant, pristine clarity if we pay attention. But we are put on our marks. We are the demanding of, let's say, the Zen archery school is very demanding at the moment. That period of time, and not just goes so long, oh, this will do. Nothing will do anymore. Yes, you have to embrace fully what's going on, because without that matching, that's a lovely word, that absolute matching, it doesn't mean keeping it, but it means going, oh, and the next murderer walks in, go, oh, that's curious. But in the next second, you make your choice. But the first thing has to be open curiosity to whatever it is, embracing. But that word acceptance, that many people just think the word acceptance means putting up with forever, and it does not. It means the instant welcome. Oh, hello. So in walks this leprous beggar to have dinner with you. And you go, oh, hello, welcome. And in that instant, this is Lord Krishna or whatever. And it's transformed, just like the kiss of beauty to the beast, that heartful space that beauty had towards the beast. That is the state that we have to be in with our whole of our lives, or that we have to be, but we are being moved towards. So, you know, the story of the Zen master living up on the mountain, a monk, and the local girl, 16, has got pregnant, and they say, who's the father? And she says, oh, that Shri, whatever his name is, up on the mountainside. And they go and they address him, and they say, is your child? Okay. So he takes the boy in. 10 years later, she owns up and says, no, it was that, whoever it was. And then they come and they take this boy that he's going to love, And they say, no, you've got to come now to your real father. Okay. And it's that kind of okayness, but okayness including the ability to instantly make a new choice, but without resisting the state. And that is very subtle.
Now, can I pause you there? Really important point there, because it's in that moment of noticing the state, but not resisting in that state while choosing
Yes,
a new state.
yes, yes, yes.
That's really difficult for most people. That's where we get stuck, right?
That's why you cannot accept from the state of the mind in separation. When mind is practiced on a daily basis, whether it's storming or the sun shining, of rooting in the heart, in gratefulness for the fun of the beautiful new day, or the recognizing, oh, I might have to tweak this a little bit, but the embracing of the current state, that doesn't take more than a microsecond. Just to say, oh, yes. But if you make the choice for the new state, but not from the state of resistance to what is the experience.
You see, that all makes sense to me, but of course, the natural knee-jerk reaction to a state that's uncomfortable, that's kind of dredging something up from the shit that's been buried under the syrup, right? Is like resisting that, right?
But the longer you resist it, the less possibility it has of being transformed. You have to bring it into that place of the mother nourishing the poisonous snake, because the poisonous snake is what undermines the current beautiful wave that's just rising and breaking. You go, oh, what a beautiful wave! Look, there's the sunshine and all the little jewel drops of water, and the next one is even more and more and more, because we are being widened by love or by consciousness, whatever word you use. Whatever word we use is a definition, and we have to be able to define the undefinable somehow.
Can I draw this back to your example you
Yeah,
gave earlier about being in Orchiva and you were in this house which was like had black mold in the walls? Can I
but it
use
was
that as
beautiful. It was very beautiful.
So can I use that as an example
Yeah,
then?
yeah,
Could
yeah.
it be that you were in this house that was very beautiful and it was a lovely moving in experience with everyone helping you move in and you could engage with that? But
Yeah.
then you also noticed this black mold and it's like, so are you saying that basically, as the analogy goes, like that you were looking at this, well, this was just not just an analogy, this was your experience. You looked at the mold and like, I can't live in this. But if you remained focused on the problems and the mold and all of that, and then you choosing another house in
Yes.
that state of resistance, then it doesn't work out as well as if you were just
Because you
imagining a
haven't
better
accepted the
situation.
state. And it's not the expression of the state, but it's the underlying state which is giving rise to the experience. Because if I've got a state of resisting, for example, in my chart, we looked at it, I've got my mother having lots of operations and being ill and being used to that and programmed with that. As a child, I still have stuff to do with the Savaragahara chakra, the freedom from all disease, and moving beyond that. So I will, from time to time, little things will rise, and learning to be simple with it and to free the underlying state, not heal from or that word heal is a very peculiar word, from the current situation, because it's the current situation is merely an expression of an underlying belief which doesn't exist in the heart field, an underlying belief in that reality has malevolent and benevolent situations. The situations are simply expressions of an underlying belief or an underlying condition from which we are moving beyond. As we move everything into the heart field from that state of transmission, then it doesn't even compute, doesn't exist. Heart doesn't recognize these.
This is such an important point because when you consider, if I, again, I have to frame everything in astrology because that's what I do. That's where my
Do.
mind
That's what we're
goes.
here for. We're here for that.
But that's what I naturally do anyway with my mind. So I'm
Yeah,
like
yeah,
everything
yeah,
you
yeah,
say,
yeah.
it's like drawn back into an astrological context and given it a framework and meaning in that sense. And yeah.
And this is why I'm
So
with you, but Gary, because
yeah, of
it's
course.
so useful. This thing of redefining and redefining at the surface or the way we engage with matter and situations. And it's so beautiful to be able to go, oh yes, we can go beyond that and beyond that and beyond that. And so and it's really incredible because we exist, or we seem to play in this playground of hard and soft and difficulties and things, because it's our game, isn't it? It's what we're playing.
It's a game, but let's start with the kind of the astrology of it, because there are some quite more like, and you use the word intense, like Scorpio has that kind of word applied to it a lot. There's an intensity about Scorpio, and for example, the moon is said to be in its debilitation in Scorpio, and so when we use words like that, then you kind of think, okay, what does that mean? Where the mind can go to a dark place, quote unquote, right? And some people's experience of dark could be a positive thing, as in I'm trying to understand myself, I'm trying to go into myself and really dig deep. And then someone else's might be I just feel like something's off here, this in terms of like your experience of a physical thing like mold. There's also, like, you could say, things in the mind that we don't want to really deal with, right? Or in the psyche, whatever. So that's why the moon is challenging in Scorpio. I always think of the one person I always think of when I think of that with Rahu in Scorpio, because he had Rahu and the moon in Scorpio, was Nietzsche.
Yes.
He's a good example of somebody who really went there, like to the nth degree went there, and disturbed his mind though in the process. Well, according to reports, he apparently ended up his life, quite mad, quote unquote, right? So it's like, how do we go there, unearth all of this, and use that analogy again of feeding the snake? How do we go there and feed it without feeding it to the point of it consumes us?
Well, as far as, for me, it's always very simple. Train yourself to root always, whether it's joy or terror, in the heart field. The heart field, even if it's the tiniest little thread, we're bungee jumping from that state. That's what we are. Our natural, the heart field is a way of describing that state of what you might call heaven, or I don't know, but the place where everything is smooth. Now, if we anchor the mind, which is all over the place in a million thousand infinite pieces all over the place, 10,000 things that Lao Tzu talks about. And if we anchor the mind always to run for home. I have this little picture on my early websites, a little girl in the garden, a toddler, finds her a snail. She'd never seen one before with its, and instead of freaking, she turns and looks at the window with the kitchen, and there's her mum. So she just runs for home. And if we train our mind, that simple analogy, to always return to the state of being undisturbed, there's always that little star in the heart, that pole star of guidance that I started many, many years ago when I started playing with this kind of thing with everybody. There is no situation, there is nothing, even at the point of total explosion of everything, that cannot be anchored by one who really is practiced in anchoring their attention, their root of their bungee cord in the heart field. And one year I was looking at this, and my being said, but you are the little song that the divine child is singing to herself safely at home in the heart. You never went anywhere. The you, the essential you, is already that. And then you could go straight back to any of the great writers and saints and jnanis and go, yeah, you are that. And it's not just an idea, it's an absolute truth. You can train the mind in all circumstances to go back to that place. And it's the simplest childlike, people would even say childish, too simplistic, of putting your hand on your heart and training yourself to make that your intentional anchor at any time, in any circumstance. Even when you're running from a burning building, you can still be doing that. And it's the feeling, that deep feeling, that I've been exploring myself a bit this last month. I don't know how long we've spoken, but exploring some of the experiences for my memoir that I'm writing of when I was a little girl, when I was really little, and going back to my early experiences with Jesus, my experience through the Catholic, what I was given, and seeing how together with all of the wounds and sorrow and all of that stuff, together with my own personal, intimate, deep feeling of intimacy, and that, although the Vedas and all of that knowledge of the Vedic, my mind burst open with knowing all that when I first started looking at the Eastern philosophy, and the knowing, but going back to my early childhood feeling of, oh yes, there is somebody, there is something, and that little intimacy that we all long for, that little echo, even though we've become very sophisticated and grown up and adult, and we know that we don't do a temper tantrum in a business meeting, for example, even if we're feeling it, to actually distinguish from that deep feeling in the heart, what is it that is my home, my Shruti note, and making that Shruti note your own. And that is just self-training.
I'm just that for me brings up this sense of, with Scorpio, this sense of transcendence, because I often used to think of that as, or if I use not the word transcendence, but transforming, that would be like, oh, I'm going to go there and go through this experience and process it, my trauma or whatever around this, and it's like that's the transformation. But eventually, I think I realized that actually the transformation is settling into that stillness you're talking about, beyond all that turbulence.
And allowing, that word allowing doesn't mean keeping the experience you're having, but allowing that each breath is new. And it can be, you slip through the cracks in that way. And you don't have to spend the next 10 years in incarcerated because somebody put some drugs in your case and you end up in a jail, any of the horrific things that might happen, because you don't have to, because you can slip through the cracks. And the most amazing things happen. These are the moments in every breath that a miracle being the shift in perception that gives rise to a circumstance that the mind says, this couldn't happen. And yet it does. We know things happen that couldn't happen in 3D land, but they do. But it's your, and I suppose the spiritual teachers talk about trust. It's not even trust. You make it your knowing, because this is what you, in your sovereign authority, in your life story, have chosen. You've chosen it to keep training every single thing, whether it's celebration at the next dawn, in pleasure that somebody has invited you to dinner, or simple things. Or it can be some amazing miracle. You are going to be bankrupt the next day, and all of a sudden, I don't know, great Aunt Matilda, who you never heard of, has left you a few 100,000. You know what I mean? It's like things which could not happen, like raising from the dead. That's because coherence in that juxtaposition of opposite. It's that union of opposite. A thing that could not happen, it replaces completely an incoherent situation, and it's the expression, the picture on the screen that we experience. That's not the miracle. That is the demonstration of the miracle of the shift in perception. But we can train ourselves moment by moment to be in that place of openness and celebration in the heart field that never left. The little song that the divine child is singing, always safely at home in the heart. So it's the juxtaposition of the greatest terror. Think of bungee jumping. You get to the point of having jumped into matter, so you're buried alive, and yet you are still the stillness, the silence, and you never let go of that, however spider's web thin it might seem to be. You see, this is the union of opposites. And I suspect it has, if you start telling me a bit more about Rahu and Scorpio, I suspect that these extremes, like Rahu is the extreme one who dances on the razor's edge.
Oh, speaking of dancing on the razor's edge, I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how in my life I've done this so much, where I have, because everything you're saying resonates, because obviously I've lived this, this sense of, it's in that moment that, you think everything is going to shit. You think everything is
Yes,
falling apart, and then something else comes up that you didn't expect at all. Because that's also what Scorpio is about, by the way. It's unexpected change. That's what
yeah. Well,
Scorpio is.
that's the Rahu as well that I
And
find
and,
really.
and Rahu just exaggerates it more and more, and
Yes,
all of that. So it's like it's full on. And I have this sense a lot that, it's like I kind of go to the edge, kind of really kind of pushing it to the edge sometimes, because I know that it's going to like pivot and then create this other situation that I just
that,
don't see
that's
immediately.
you, isn't it? You love that.
I
You
kind
love
of
that.
I
I
do
know
love
it's
it,
in you. Yes,
but it's a bit nerve-wracking. I'm kind
it
of
is.
getting a bit
It is.
wearisome
But
of it.
why do people? And I'm not saying I do it, but why do people go watch horror movies? For goodness' sake,
Exactly. Right. Right.
letting the mind really, really feel and believe it. Because
Oh,
one of the,
that's now interesting when you think about horror movies in the context of this discussion about Rahu and Scorpio, because why would anyone go to a horror of any kind in their mind?
because the being, the one, the absolute, wants it. It wants. I used to ask that question, and it said, so there should be nowhere, no experience that is unavailable to the absolute. So it loves being, looking for the experiencing what he can't be, the opposite. He absolutely seems to adore it, loving to be buried alive. And as the Popol Vuh says, one of my favorite quotes is, no pleasure greater than coming back to life after having been torn to pieces.
You see, that's the thing I think I'm always chasing.
Yeah.
I know it as a Scorpio individual myself, I have Scorpio rising. I have this constant need to sort of pick at the scab. You know what I mean? It's
I
like I have
know.
this constant need to go there to understand things on a whole deeper level. That's the kind of cliched view of Scorpio.
Exactly.
But I go much further. I feel like I go to the point where I want it to be so like intense that by the time I release this, it's gonna give me so much more.
Blissful orgasmic ecstasy of being alive.
Hmm.
Yeah. Why not? But you know what? What makes it possible is that beneath the surface of the conscious mind, deep, deep, deep in your heart, you also are a lover of the absolute, deep, deep lover. And that's one of the things I recognized in the beginning, when we first met, that wow, yeah, I could feel the I don't know, probably what drew you to start having these conversations
Hmm.
and search, because something in you goes, yeah, how far can we push it?
Hmm.
Surfing the tsunami.
And when I first came across you actually in the Song of Rahu, I felt like, wow, this she's really pushing it.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought like, yeah, this is not something you normally hear. Like, wow, she just said what? But do
Yes.
you get a sense of after having released the Song of Rahu and any feedback you're getting, do you feel like what kind of feedback are you getting from people on that?
Well, the people who are not yet tying up their experience of life and what's going on in the world and things like that, or their individual or the bigger picture, they're not really engaging because we've not really fully put it out there. I mean, I have among a few circles of people like who know your exploration, and the people who really have stayed with me through my own exploration. But the bigger picture, which I know is going to be, I've got to define it more and more in terms that is going to be of value to people who apparently are in authority, to really understand it's the union of opposites. How do we get absolute the power of electricity, for example? We put together a positive and a negative frequency in a neutral state. If we didn't have that, we would have very unstable. We've got to make it stable. And one of the ways that the one is doing is making it stable, but it can't make itself unstable. It can't, because it is what it is. I mean, I am, and the consciousness, that's what it is. And I know in my whole being that unless I put in all sorts of um, underlying frequencies, consciousness is biased in the favor of life, of expression, and what we might call love. There is a bias, because otherwise we'd be going into antimatter all the time, and yet it wants to explore all states. So the thread of losing what it is might not be available to mind, but it is available to itself, because it cannot be other than itself. you know. So in the sense, it's exploring all these situations, like Rahu the shepherd, shepherding himself back to himself. How else could he do anything? Because he's the one. He wants to get into the deepest, darkest little crevices. And I tell you, more and more will open. And the more and more that open these crevices, like someone like Wim Hof pushing himself to swim under the ice and hold his breath for I don't know how long. Like the yogis, like the jnanis that bury themselves alive for 6 months and stop their heart, and yet their knowing is such, they've so united with their own knowing that they know that it's known that will come back to life.
It's like that kind of skirting on the edge all the time. It's like pushing it
Yes,
to the limit all the time, right, with Rahu. And I think that's why if we look at Nietzsche in his life and what he did, like he had such insight into the human psyche, but at the same time, he challenged his mind maybe too much, at that time, maybe that he just wasn't able to cope with it.
This thing of too much, I don't know, because there only is the one. So what could be too much? Nothing in this world, nothing in our story could happen that was not permitted, that is not permitted, or is not engaged in by the one, seeing as there only is the one substance experiencing all experiences. So do you know what I mean? The essence of who Nietzsche was, or even appeared to be, is never lost, couldn't be, because
let's use the example then of like just everyday person who experiences Rahu in Scorpio. And I've seen this a lot over the years with people who have it in their birth chart, and they have a tendency to go into these kinds of like worst case scenario thinking, doom and gloom, like predictions, and apocalyptic even sometimes. Right. And it's like, well, I can understand why you're going there, because it's like actually the impulse of Scorpio is all about preparing for the worst. Because if you imagine if you never ever thought a negative thought your whole life, and all of a sudden something happens that it's the most catastrophic, you're not emotionally prepared for it.
Yes.
Right.
Because the syrup has broke. The syrup, that beautiful wallpaper is not enough to hold back the mold behind the walls.
Right, exactly. But this is, and I suppose the thing about astrology is always is reminding us of the contrasting, the opposition, the opposite sign. And in this case, opposite Scorpio is Taurus, which is all about beautifying everything and making everything look nice, and it's all perfect, and it all looks lovely. But underneath is the mold.
One of these things I'm saying, though, in all of the Rahu stuff and everything I'm saying, is that whatever it may look like, it is already that which we might call beauty or purity or consciousness. And Rahu says, all is pure, impurity is not, doesn't exist, if you know what I mean. So it's like the one desiring to experience impurity has to go to the place where it's so veiled that it cannot be, it doesn't access in the mind or in the body. It's eternal in its state. And because if it's in its eternal state, how could it possibly experience violence and disaster and chaos and disorder and all of that? It can't, but it wants to. There is a movement to experience it within duality, to go beyond the boundaries. And there's always that movement. I feel it in myself and I recognize it in you, of going, yeah, but that's impossible. That's a koan. It cannot be. Like that thing of what is the sound of one hand clapping and things. I remember when I was a little girl, very young, I was given all sorts of things from within. And I think, why am I thinking this? And I had this tennis ball or this ball, and I had to turn it inside out. I don't know, I started about 3 or 4. I had to turn it inside out, and yet I knew the thickness of the ball. If I turned it inside out, it wouldn't contain, because even how thin it was still smaller. The whole circumference was smaller than the outer, and it couldn't contain it. It's like, of course, pushing all that has come in mind, that has grown, extrapolated into the world, pushing it back within. And I didn't know what I was grasping with in those days, but I was giving, why am I thinking this nonsense? I didn't even think it was nonsense at the beginning, but it went on for a long time until I was quite grown up before I realized what I'd been pondering on and other such things, very, very young. And I'm what?
For me, it's this kind of this sense of this Rahu nature to constantly push the envelope. It's like you can't just, it's like you have released the Song of Rahu now as a book. But now it's like, what's next? And it's like you have to keep moving forward, right?
Absolutely, but
But
there's
what
much
happens when
more.
you place that though in the context of Scorpio, where it's constantly picking at the scab, it's constantly digging into the psyche? What is this going on here? I'm trying to understand this to the point where actually you've unearthed everything, but then you're sitting in a heap of shit.
But it's never going to stop because it's a never-ending story. The desire to move beyond when it's only in mind can only be tolerated when you have that spider's web link into the heart, even if it's totally in the unknown. So that's why we have to keep looking every day or every moment, whenever we have those quiet moments, to look into what's really going on, and to relax into the place which is not fueled by this impulse, but is actually knows all is known and all is okay. And you've got that as well, you see.
But what I'm reminded of is what you mentioned earlier about it's interesting how you use these images of doves and serpents, because Scorpio is, everyone thinks of Scorpio as a scorpion, of course, that's the typical thing we think of. But actually, it has a, like you might say, a higher vibration of the eagle or even the dove.
Yeah.
That's another expression of Scorpio, because if you think about the kind of the scorpion and that image of going to ground and scurrying under a rock and hiding, and lashing out if you feel attacked. But then there's also that kind of higher expression of the eagle swooping and having an eye on everything from that kind of height. So that Scorpio isn't just about controlling things on that kind of minuscule level, even though it does want to go to that level, but it's also about rising up above all of that noise and recognizing actually that everything is in control already. That's for me the kind of interesting thing about Scorpio, that it can come from both angles. I know lots of Scorpios. Being a Scorpio, I know lots, and they always like to be in control. But again, it's that reminder that actually it's all already in control, and it's just about aligning with that. It's kind of like a higher on up sort of expression of the sign, which is why you'll see these kind of different creatures that seem very opposed.
They are all, if you look in the early medieval text of alchemy, you can see the images of this, of the scorpion, this snake, and the dove, and all of these. They're all the images. As you're talking, I'm getting these pictures of some of these early texts. They're all there. All those images are there, so clear.
You know the yoga pose, Garudasana. It's the eagle
Yes,
pose where you stand
yes.
on one leg and you wrap your leg around the other, and your
I
arms
know.
are wrapped.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so there's a whole mythology around Garuda, the eagle god, and he like swoops down and devours the serpents, and he's like Vishnu's mount, and so that all ties in with this ability to take the mind out of this dark place and to lift up out of this.
It's to experience it and ultimately to take the mind to the place which knows it's all okay. So it can be perfectly, perfectly aligned and matched, and accept that, yes, I'm bungee jumping. Even if the mind doesn't know it, there's a deep, deep sense of being able to go into the most dire circumstances and yet stay deeply, deeply relaxed. Places like they say it's like John of the Cross called like the dark night of the soul bit, that where the mind is in shreds, but some part of you is totally and utterly at peace.
You see, I actually would say also that the truth of that is, for someone who's Scorpio or someone with Rahu in Scorpio, perhaps Moon in Scorpio, is that actually, unless there is something to chew over, then like for example, if there isn't something going wrong, if everything is perfect, it's like then the mind is like, for Scorpios anyway, it's like, wait a minute, where's the problem here? I don't see a problem.
Yes,
I need to know where the problem is so I can deal with the problem, right?
the knack is to notice and feel the grating, the grit in the oyster, to notice it and accept it. And at the same moment, in the acceptance, there is a new state comes because of the ability to completely surrender at that moment. You're out the box. It's like becoming one with the situation. You've got to match everything. So any kind of resistance anywhere, and of course we find resistance in our bodies. So it's a perpetual game of exploring. How do I take my body mind to be to this absolute total surrender to being torn to pieces? And yet in the very instant of being willing, you become the box, and yet there is no box. It's gone. The game isn't there, and it's what you're playing. It's lovely because you know you've got that place of deep, deep, deep knowing, and yet you're stretching your mind. This is what I perceive anyway. You're stretching your mind to encompass even more. So we are being widened and widened in every breath, in every situation, to God knows where, to completely accept the most terrible circumstances. And yet it's not in order to keep them, it's in to allow the next evolution. Because we're dying in that, as Rumi or was Kabir said, you die in every moment. But you can't die unless you accept fully.
That is, I think, the crux of it, because Scorpio is the sign of change, of dying to every moment. But at the same time, as you say, like, it's giving up this resistance, because it is also the sign of resistance to change.
It's what they say in that, what is it? They make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set forever apart. It's the judgment. And it's not, as Jesus says, judge not lest you be judged. It's not that the judgment is evil or wrong or sin or anything like that. It's that if you start to judge, this should not be, I don't want this, even before you've embraced it, you can't digest that. And it all happens so subtly and so swiftly. So there has to be the amount of allowing, like a baby falls and it will bounce, and an adult will fall and every bone is broken.
Wow, yeah, that's so, wow. So, I mean, the thing about that is, it's like, again, we could think about Scorpio as all that, like, digested stuff, and also maybe undigested stuff a lot of the time, because it's literally, that's the part of the body it rules is the anus and the genitals and all the hidden parts and all the shit that comes out, right? And everything that's been processed and hopefully got rid of fully. But of course, we don't get rid of it fully. We don't even process fully, let alone get rid of it.
We don't. And that's why all the emphasis on the the symbolic thing of the metabolism. Our metabolism has to become super fluid, super. So you digest everything in the moment. Yeah. So yeah.
Not resist the moment, just feel it, and just allow it, transcend it completely. You must feel it completely.
Exactly. And so you match the word. I mean, I've got my lexicon that's coming out when I eventually get it, is examining words like allowing. What does it really mean? And expanding. And I could have a whole book on what the word allowing, what does it mean? It does not mean what the assumption is, that if I allow this, I permit it forever. No, first you must accept this is actually happening. You go in your basement and it's flooded. You don't, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You actually have to take your mind to an intelligent place where it says, okay, there must be a leak somewhere. So we get in the appropriate person. And it's no good having a temper tantrum in the middle of the basement being flooded out. You take intelligent steps. But first you have to accept that it actually is, something is happening. Inexperience, but there's something happening and that needs addressing. So it's a koan all the time, how to absolutely accept what's going on in the world. It's being torn to pieces. It's nothing stable anywhere. And
this is what would seem to be the issue with Scorpio, is that it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, there's that, but there's the other thing about, if it's almost like, if it's not intense enough for a Scorpio, for that archetype of Scorpio, shall we say, for everybody, we all have it, that it actually is kind of like it could easily fester.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not enough to actually come up into our conscious awareness. So it's like the mold will continue to grow underneath the wallpaper. But it's like, for Scorpio, it needs to be that intense so that actually when it does come up, you are on your feet and out and doing it and on it, right?
All at the same time.
Hmm.
And it all going on in the moment. There's at this place we're talking about, this is beyond time. It's like all happening at the same moment.
It's why people love, like, bungee jumping, but also why people love, like, risky sports and things.
Yes. I mean, who would want to go and test yourself to climb or to do things that seem to be impossible? Everyone's looking for the next thing. I'm not everyone, but some part of humanity's someone that likes the razor's edge. looking. Well, we've been to the moon, now let's do that and that. And whether we've been in our mind or whether an imagination and it's all made up, or whether someone actually physically did, it's irrelevant in the way. I mean, there's always those questions. Did
But
this actually happen?
what happens when though somebody goes to that, like, because it's, you know, you could easily say that about going to bungee jumping and doing extreme sports, things like that, and you can see the extremes of that, and you know what the extremes are, and it's like, oh, if you do that, you can get killed, so you better be careful. But what about going to that kind of depth in your mind, in the psyche?
Like
It's like,
Nietzsche.
at what point does it become like, actually, I'm just dredging up old traumas and re-traumatizing myself over and over again?
If you do it strategically, and you go to these places without having that spider's web fine thread that's linked you, that stabilized you in the heart field, then it can be very dangerous. So doing dredging up stuff, are you going round and round and round in circles, like somebody I knew that had had some abuse and she was still dealing with it 40 years later, going to therapists and thinking, my goodness sake, 40 years, I mean, you know, but it's always only the same thing, whether it looks like a tearing to pieces or revelation. There's only one thing, is consciousness exploring itself. It all goes back to some form of self-inquiry. And you can't go anywhere else except to truth in the end. I mean, even Nietzsche, that you think maybe destroyed his mind from what he was doing, he couldn't. We cannot self-annihilate ultimately. You can't, because you are what you are originally, consciousness.
But that I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm just reminded of the extremes that Rahu goes to, then bringing in the other extremes of indeed just that, like annihilation. Because if you're dwelling on things for so long in your mind and you just cannot take it anymore, well, the only other option, the only other counterbalance to that is you just want annihilation. You want to blunt it all out. You just want to like dull your mind. You want to either, you know, take drugs, drink, whatever it needs, right?
In the end, all you get is this laughter, huge laughter. I mean, ultimately, that's where we get, because it's trying to do the impossible. And in the story of this planetary logos, I don't know, there will be other dimensions where we play other games, I suppose. I've found them all within the mind so far. I've looked at all the aliens and all the, but in the end, it's all within mind. All of our story here, it's all a mental universe, and you can have whatever you want. The one thing that threw me a lot in the early years was that I used to be a devout Catholic. I mean, not Catholic, but because I couldn't be within the church. But one day, in the middle of divorce and despair and everything else, I'm kneeling in the church one day, and I'm told immediately, no question, this is not your place. Get out. Don't stay here anymore. Not your archetype anymore. Not for you. My mind did not understand. I mean, I had read things like St. Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and all of that, and I dropped the baby with the bathwater for a long time. Absolute devastation that what I had placed my trust and my faith in didn't even exist and didn't even want me there. I mean, it's a big mindfuck, obviously, excuse me, but that's what it was. And then I come to the end and I realized it's all made up. If I want a personal experience of love, personalized to the little me, and I want to know the absolute truths of the non-existence of everything, like Nietzsche wandered looking for, it doesn't matter. I can have both, and I can have different experiences. In fact, all of it can be mine. So I do. I make up different bits for different bits of me, and I have an intimate relationship, which in the ultimate things, the scale of things doesn't exist anyway, and I can have whatever I want. You can make it. It's all customizable, because there's only one thing to find. Whatever your heart desires, you can have. So never think that anything is impossible, because it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
whatever,
mean, you said earlier to me about, you know, that you get a sense from me that I have this kind of, you know, I can't remember the words you used, but I always feel like I've always had this, but I kind of never really thought that other people didn't have it. I just thought it was natural to actually to have a sense of bungee jumping, right? That I've always had one foot in, one foot out. that it's always this kind of sense of that there's something other, and that's why maybe I could go a bit further and go more intensely into things. But I've never felt ever that it would ever go too far, that I could go too far. You know, having that kind of center in whatever, you know, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But like, I always assume that everybody else has that.
Well, I guess that kind of curiosity, or that wherever there's a boundary, humanity wants to transcend it, or you as humanity, as your own unique blend or version of it, wants to go to the edge and more. Like Mum says, don't put your finger in the socket in the wall, and so baby does.
I tell you one thing that I don't really want to go to the edge of, or any further, or even close to the edge, is with any kind of substance, because that's one area where I feel like I don't feel very comfortable. If I take something and it makes me feel other, I don't feel like I have any control over it. Like, I don't like doing drugs.
No, I actually match you with that, because I think I had in my life, my early life, I think I've smoked a couple of joints or something like that when I was younger. Never found it very interesting, and made me feel a bit sick. And then ayahuasca or 2 or 3 times, and each time the plant or the energy where it said, "This is not your place. Don't come here." Even when I was so I've had a very clear direction in this embodiment that is not for you. And so I didn't like joining particular cults or I think when I was exploring Kabbalah, I got to a limit and it said, "You've done all this before, this is not for you." And I actually listened and found other things to explore. You know, I've got to the limit, and then it was like, "Nah, wasting your time, don't go down that pothole." So I kind of stopped. I knew that I knew enough of that, so I didn't. But I agree with you about substances, and I don't know, even alcohol these days, I don't drink it really. It just doesn't do me any good. But I wouldn't go anywhere like some of the serious drugs ever. And the little bit I've played has been so minute. Where whatever sensation or knowledge, I've gone deeper in my own consciousness than ever I could with any of these mind-bending substances. There was no point.
That's what I feel as well. It's like, I think if you have this sort of, well, you know how this, a lot of people as well say in terms of like taking substance to get you to that state, whatever, you know, of whatever, it's like it's unearned. You'll hear that, you know, from people that, you know, if you haven't earned that, you just take a substance and it's kind of like it's almost like a false state of awakening or something.
Well, my being always said, you cannot earn anything, you cannot deserve anything, you simply choose. And so if I want anything particularly, and I haven't yet got the experience, it's because I haven't gone to the place of desiring sufficiently or setting it up. I know that whatever there is that I might say I desire and I haven't got yet, it's because I haven't bothered yet and not been there yet. I mean, there's the whole of the cosmic supermarket, so there's enough to deal with, you know. But there isn't anything that I can't have if I don't want it. I mean, if I want it.
So let's talk about another thing about Scorpio that we haven't addressed at all, and you know, because you know, obviously these are big, hard-hitting topics, you know, in terms of Scorpio, and even the fact that it's all about change and unexpected change, and the most unexpected changes in life that we don't necessarily process fully, that we resist the change, right? And also the biggest change is, you know, the passing over experience, right? That we call death, right? That's Scorpio. That's all Scorpio. I've always been fascinated with, as obviously as a Scorpio rising, I've always been fascinated by death, and I think about all these things that you just mentioned. But I also think about, you know, how a lot of people talk about past lives and how they affect our current life, you know, and of course the Vedic, you know, philosophy and the Jyotish astrology is all set up around actually that this is your prarabdha karma, that, you know, the fructification of the karma for this lifetime, you know, all of these things. But then for me, it's like, and for people who don't believe in reincarnation, you know, I don't have an issue, because I mean, I personally do. I don't know where that belief comes from, but I don't need it. I don't need to think about past life, because is it relevant to me now? Do you know what I mean? It's like this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
what's
yeah.
happening now, but is it like what is the use of this now, right? But the other thing I want to talk about, we haven't talked about at all with Scorpio, that we if we don't talk about it, we'll be amiss, and we have to talk about things. We could go further into it, but taboos of all kinds, but sex,
Oh, yes,
le
sex,
petit
very.
more, the little death, right? What about in terms of sex? Because there's lots we could talk about with that in terms of Rahu and Scorpio and sex and incest and taboos and you name it.
Yes, yes. What do we say? Sex is such an amazing. I mean, this union of opposites, this the masculine and feminine, what we call it. What is it really? And oh my God, I mean, write whole books on it, and people do. But ultimately, we are it all. We've defined one little bit to experience one little bit on the whole spectrum of gender and sexuality. And I mean, it's like, where do you want to go with all of this? What do we want to talk about?
Well, I for
And
some reason
also, what's interesting is all the exploration at the moment of transgender and what is man and what is a woman and the whole thing. It's all very blurred at the moment, and it's not all, but it seems to be for some people incredible the stories that there are. Beautiful
But
exploration.
for me, that's an expression of Rahu also, because it's also for me, I think the moving into an age of Aquarius, which Rahu is said to rule. I think that the trans issue, whether it's transgender or transhumanism, even, I think will be a big thing moving into the future.
Yes. Oh my God, the transhumanism bit and the bits of what's robotic and what's actually human and
Yeah, this is now we're on the cusp of that. Like it's kind of like this precipice almost that some people are talking about, but it could also be something that takes us to new heights that we can't even imagine right now. But apart from that, let's talk about in terms of, I don't know why I'm thinking about Nietzsche again. I'm thinking when I think about sex, I always just think about, I don't think about like the kind of the act of sex necessarily. I think about the energy of it and the transformational capacity of the sex act. And even in terms of using the sex energy, like sex magic, that's
yes,
what I think about.
yeah, yeah.
That's so for me with Rahu and Scorpio, that for me would be more. And again, with Nietzsche, I think he would have been very much of that mind as well, that he probably, you know, used his energy in that way and delved deeper, using it as fuel, using his sexual energy as fuel.
I mean, ultimately, when we explore what people think of as yoga, this is all to do with this and all the ideas of the transforming experience of Kundalini and what being embodied is. And I mean, it's such a vast thing. I mean, that we could talk for years on just this and which particular bit. But
Yeah, which particular bit? It's like
no,
it's yeah,
and
that's the thing. But with Rahu, maybe will we just maybe finish with this sense of Rahu in Scorpio and sex and death and all the taboos and all of the hidden stuff. Let's face it, it's all of this, like even in the body. Scorpio is the genitals and the anus,
yes,
all the hidden parts of the body that you don't
yeah,
share with anybody. You only share it with one other person, maybe or
yeah,
intimate others, right? So it's like Rahu there can further distort, derange, exaggerate, block, then release, block and release again, this kind of part of life.
and somehow we have to get to that state that is able to observe and already been experienced, depends where we are, with dispassion, anything. And that there is no area of all what seems to be depraved or taboo that we cannot explore and look at. It's the minute we move away from judging, from that dispassion, we get into judgment, anything, we cannot get to the truth of what's going on. If there's only one substance, one consciousness, one being playing all the parts, it obviously there is a movement to explore the deepest, darkest little crevices. And if we explore with judgment, we're going to get ourselves in a right pickle. But if we explore with dispassion, just observing from the heart, then cool. There is no underlying current that can pull you out of your own sovereignty. You
So
know,
when you say something like Rahu is the rapist,
yeah. I mean, rape and the scavenging dogs of war. That's how people experience. I don't actually think that the poem says I am the rapist, but it could be interpreted as that. But he talks about the different states: famine, rape, and the scavenging dogs of war, and still I am the beloved. It's talking about states rather than identification with any particular form, I think. I mean, I'll look at it in more depth because I haven't explored that thought. Never having he doesn't say I'm the rapist, but could do.
But if we draw that back to this thing of, you know, I mean, let's face it, that is a lot of people's experience with sex. A lot.
Yes.
And that going back to childhood experiences over and over again.
Yeah.
And you might say re-traumatizing yourself over and over again with this experience that happened.
As long as you do not anchor everything in the heart field, you can experience re-traumatizing. But if you explore from the heart field, okay, I'm talking about somebody that came many, many years ago, and her father had abused her and she hadn't remembered. And during a deep, I mean, I trained originally in regression and integration. So this is how I gradually was taken into exploring from the heart rather than just doing standard therapy, whatever it was. And she went into the state, I think we were 3 hours exploring. She experienced the recognition, the realization, and the transformation of that moment into a porthole to enlightenment. And all without coming back into the ordinary physical state of looking at it. And it was the most amazing experience, really was. And it's like when that moment is fully matched, it's a portal to enlightenment. When there's total acceptance, nothing ever happened. This was all my fantasy, my dream, my being exploring. And the being wants mind to become, well, if you like, God, I don't know what words I can use because any word defines, but it wants to become the absolute source, knowing that there is no limitation, there are no thresholds. I can move beyond from being here, this simple embodied human being, to being to be able to create worlds or whatever, raise from the dead, doesn't matter.
So what is the thing to do? And I guess this it's a silly question in a way, because of course you wouldn't meet that experience if you are centered in the heart field. But
not even needs the desire. It wants to know everything, even what it is not, as itself.
But what of the person who comes to you in that experience of not and being traumatized by an experience like that, by any kind of experience where they feel like their boundaries were trampled and they're like cannot get through that in that moment?
It's only mind that can't get through. When you start with the tiniest little, there's an old lady came to, well, I'm probably as old as that one when first came, and she had nothing that she loved. Nothing. I always look for something where you have got an experience of love, of something. And we found out that she had a little tiny canary or bird or something, and I remember that. And that was the beginning. You've got to find the tiniest little place that is true, that they have experienced, that they know, however small it might be, even if it's just the touch of two fingers rubbing together like that, you get that sensation of touch. I know that I'm touching these, and these two fingers know that I'm rubbing my finger and thumb together. And it can be however small, but you've got to be about a little place where you anchor, which is why when we're looking at an enlightenment training, and I trained as an enlightenment master many years, you have to find a place of the real. It's got to be something real, like you look at the life in a flower or a plant or something. There's got to be some anchor. That's why they talk about the value of a human birth, because being embodied and the absolute does not have in its absolute state that experience of humanity. So that's the story of the incarnation, if you like, Bethlehem. The absolute becomes, the invulnerable becomes completely vulnerable, like a little tiny child. So you find the smallest little thing. And I was given, when I first started from within, this as the heart star, that little spark of light, of the little piezoelectric spark, which ultimately became every cell of my body. But at the beginning, it was just like a star in the sky. in my inner sky. And from there, so you find the tiniest little place that person in all his lostness finds as real. Something, doesn't matter what, because you have to ground in something, even if it's a toe on the ground. But there's something. Even someone, they talk about Hitler and that false sentimentality of loving, I don't know, animals or whatever it was. There's got to be something real, and you begin from the real. I think years later, and I started looking at how craniosacral functioned, and they find a little place that is the absolute, that you can feel coherence. So you begin from that.
I think I've always had this in my life, and that it's not something I've ever trained in or anyone has ever taught me, but from a very young age, because I've always like been aware of the aliveness of things around me.
Yes.
That's probably what I've used more. It's like this looking at things. Like so
Yes.
I'll even in circumstances where I maybe not want to be, I'll then it switches for a moment, then I'll see something that looks alive.
Yes, and then from that you can extrapolate. It goes to everything is alive. I remember the experience of walking out of my bedroom and noticing the sunlight shining through all the little dust particles, and all of a sudden I saw the nature of absolutely everything. This was many years ago, and I went, "Oh, it's all candy floss. It's candy floss. It's all little filaments of light." And I went, "Oh, it's like that, everything." And I saw into the tiniest little, whatever it might be, bit of old
But
rubbish.
you see, you have a lifetime of now of talking about this and training other people and going there. But for me, it's like I have this experience, but when I engage with people, I get very much into I'm relaying information and we're talking and we're having this
Right.
exchange,
Okay.
and I don't really have that. And I think that that's one of the stoppers for them having the potential for that experience with me. I actually assume it's silly, it's naive, I guess, that I assume that everybody has this.
Of course they do. Of course they do. And you're seeing and you're assuming enables that consciousness that they actually already are. You know what the nature of everything has to be. Fundamentally, you already are that enlightened state. You know it. It's known, it is known within you. Maybe full identification with that state is not available yet to the mind fully, but there's enough of it to provide that sense of people being able to see and feel and taste that stability that is their own, which is actually all you, because there's only one consciousness, and the reflecting on this that is known and what is apparently unknown, and expanding into that, which is the game that you're playing. But you already have enough of the awakenedness to be able to play the game, and that state that you call maybe naive. It's what Jesus talks about. Unless you become as a little child, you've got to see with the baby eyes, and baby eyes are very naive because it's the inherent criticism in the word naive. It's not. It's a kind of simplicity and purity and innate. You are already that innately, Gary, and you know it. And I mean, if I said that, somebody might say, well, she's quoting something from the Vedas. No, it's what you are, your fundamental identity. There's enough downloaded, uploaded, whatever, already. Enough bubbles have burst, enough little dots have been joined up to give you a sense of, and so when you begin to function as that with another human being, of course it will happen naturally. It will happen naturally. And of course because that's what you are, and you're just allowing that to be there. So, and the more you play with things like that, this conversations that you wanted, which I also embraced fully when I first began to think, oh wow, this is going to be something amazing. Just having these chats, whether we're doing a blog or not or whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll have to have a thread to begin. But it's so beautiful because the more we spend time just doing this little exploration, the more space is open, the more the clouds clear, the more potential is available. And we're not doing anything, we're just letting what we are explore and having a lot of fun, because you like to explore at the same time, same way as I do. How wide can we make it? How wide can we allow it? Where can we go now?
This is
That's
what I love about our conversation.
fun.
It's that they're so expansive and comforting and opening and clarifying, but it's also just playful and joyous and,
Yeah,
childlike, which that's what I really enjoy. Because I feel like when there's too much effort, when you have to try so hard, it's not it.
exactly. This is the allowing, the doodling, the
Mm.
infinite doodling of the absolute. It loves. You look at, let's say, plants or the tropical fish, or I mean, just look at the peculiarities that you find in the depths of the ocean, and it's like, wow, infinite doodling. That's what we're playing, huh?
So I would love to keep doodling and playing and exploring with Kishori, but of course we have to move on. And we are going to move on in our next conversation to Rahu in Libra. Don't forget, we're moving in reverse order through the zodiac as Rahu. So the next time we speak about Rahu, it will be all about Rahu in Libra, in Venus's sign. So I hope you can join us then to continue this conversation, this maps of consciousness. If you'd like to get in contact with Kishori and continue the conversation with her, you can go to her website. That's magicmakeover.com. It's magic with a K hyphen. So it's MAGICK hyphen makeover.com. Or she has a new website also, kishori.net, KISHORI, kishori.net. And you'll find details of her book, The Song of Rahu, which is now released. It's an ebook currently, and it will be released very soon as a print book, a paperback edition. So go get your hands on a copy. And if you'd like to continue this conversation about astrology, you can do so with myself at timelineastrology.com. And you can also follow me on patreon.com/timeline astrology. I write daily reports as well as monthly forecasts and a whole lot more besides, including a magazine and upcoming books and so on and so on. Rahu is not letting me rest. No rest for the wicked, as the saying goes. So thank you so much for listening to this all the way through to the end. And until next time.